Welcome back to QHSE Talks. Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of just extreme precision.
Right.
It's almost like engineering in a way. I mean, you fall, you break your arm, you go to the hospital, and the x-ray shows that stark, jagged white line on a black background.
Oh, yeah. It's undeniable.
Exactly. The doctor just points at it and says, there it is. There's your problem. It is incredibly clean and binary.
It is. And it's comforting, really. I mean, humans are wired to want that level of visual binary certainty. We crave a world where problems can be neatly categorized.
Yeah.
Isolated and just fixed with a cast and 6 weeks of rest.
Yeah.
But the reality of complex systems, especially in the industrial world, is much closer to diagnosing, say, a convoluted autoimmune disease.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Or, an obscure neurodevelopmental condition. The symptoms are visible, sure, but the root cause is hidden beneath layers of interacting systems.
Yeah.
And in that environment, your X-ray machine is utterly useless.
And today on QHSE Talks, we are taking that exact concept, navigating these murky, complex, multi-layered systemic failures, and applying it to a massive, critical hurdle, both for the Associate Safety Professional exam and, honestly, for real-world safety practice.
Absolutely essential.
We are conquering Domain 2, Topic 9, facilitating incident investigations, which includes root causes, contributing factors, data collection, analysis, chain of custody, and high-risk incidents.
Which sounds incredibly straightforward on paper, right?
Yeah, it really does.
I mean, you have an incident, you investigate it, you write a report, boom, done.
Right, simple.
But as we're going to explore today, it is anything but simple. We are talking about dissecting the very DNA of an organizational failure.
Wow.
Identifying root causes, analyzing contributing factors,
Right.
managing the psychological minefield of data collection.
There's huge.
It's massive.
Yeah.
And preserving a rigorous chain of custody and handling high-risk incidents without bringing a multi-million-dollar operation to a complete unnecessary halt.
I want to speak directly to you, the listener, right now. Whether you are currently cramming for your ASP certification, burning the midnight oil with a stack of flashcards and hoping all this terminology sticks.
We've all been there.
Oh, definitely. Or maybe you're already stepping onto a facility floor as a working safety professional.
Yeah.
Mastering this specific topic is everything. It is the literal dividing line between a company that simply reacts to tragedies after the fact and a company that actively, systematically prevents them from ever happening.
To set the stage for this entire discussion, we really need to anchor ourselves in the core philosophy laid out by the Center for Chemical Process Safety, or CCPS,
Right.
in their guidelines for risk-based process safety. They outline a paradigm that every safety professional must internalize.
What's the main takeaway there?
They state that standing still, congratulating ourselves on the successes of the past 20 years and celebrating the accidents that didn't happen because of our hard work, that will not prevent the next catastrophe.
Right. You can't just coast on past success.
Yes, exactly. Safety requires continuous, relentless learning from experience. Without a formal, rigorous investigation program, an organization is practically doomed to suffer repeated, escalating failures.
Because if you don't find out exactly why a system broke, you are just putting a Band-Aid on a machine that is guaranteed to break again.
Precisely.
So, to start this journey into Domain 2, Topic 9, we actually have to take a step back and examine the very language we use on a daily basis. Before we can even investigate an incident, we have to define what an incident actually is.
And that requires us to aggressively abandon some very outdated terminology.
Yes, we have to step into modern safety standards.
Historically, for decades, the default term in the industrial sector, and just in casual, everyday conversation, was accident. You hear it everywhere.
Right, there was an accident on the factory floor.
An accident at the chemical plant. A car accident.
Yeah, but in the professional safety sphere, particularly when you are operating under OSHA frameworks, that word is deeply problematic. OSHA explicitly advises against it.
They do.
Right, because the term accident carries a massive amount of psychological baggage. I mean, it implies something unavoidable. It sounds like an act of fate or just bad luck.
Yep. Oops, an accident happened.
Exactly. The stars aligned poorly today. There was absolutely nothing we could do. But our source texts point out that OSHA suggests using the term incident investigation instead. And the reasoning isn't just semantic.
No, it's profound.
Nearly all worksite fatalities, injuries, and illnesses are entirely preventable.
The vocabulary you use shapes the culture of your organization. When you use the word accident, You are essentially absolving the management system of responsibility.
Wow. Yeah.
You are subtly telling your workforce and your stakeholders that the system couldn't have stopped it. But when we look at the definitions provided by foundational safety experts, like Fred Manuel, an incident is defined as a hazard-related event.
It's a much broader category.
It encompasses a massive, comprehensive umbrella. We are talking about mishaps, near misses, occupational illnesses, environmental spills, production losses, fires, and explosions.
All of it.
All of these derive from the realization of uncontrolled hazards occurring either in a sequence or in parallel.
It is always a failure of people, equipment, supplies, or surroundings to behave as expected under a specific set of conditions.
Right.
So why do we investigate? I mean, the sources list a few key pragmatic reasons. Obviously, you have to comply with OSHA standards and federal regulations.
That's a baseline.
Right. You investigate to reduce costs and increase profits because downtime and workers' compensation are incredibly expensive.
Astronomical.
You do it to satisfy public concern. Okay, let's unpack this for a second. If we define an incident so broadly that it includes a near miss, meaning a hazard-related event, where absolutely no one was hurt, nothing was broken, no property was damaged, and not a single drop of chemical reached the environment.
Total freebie, right.
Exactly. Why on earth are we spending valuable time, money, and company resources investigating it? I can clearly hear a skeptical plant manager yelling right now, "Nobody got hurt, the system worked, stop wasting my operator's time and let's get back to production."
What's fascinating here is that the plant manager's reaction is incredibly common, but it highlights a fundamental misunderstanding of risk.
How so?
In risk-based process safety, or RBPS, investigations are not solely driven by the outcome of what did happen. They are driven by the potential consequences combined with the anticipated frequency of recurrence.
So what could have happened?
Exactly.
Right.
A near miss today is a fatal event tomorrow if the underlying systemic failure is ignored.
Let's visualize this.
Imagine a rigger is working on scaffolding 50 feet in the air. He drops a heavy pipe wrench. It plummets to the concrete floor and shatters a wooden pallet. A worker was standing 2 feet away.
Oh, man. The outcome was lucky. No one was hurt.
Right.
The plant manager says, "Phew, close call, tell the rigger to be more careful," and moves on.
And that's exactly what happens in a poor safety culture.
No.
But from a safety professional's perspective, the failure was absolute.
Because the wrench still fell.
Yes. The management system completely failed to secure that tool. The only difference between that wrench hitting the floor and that wrench hitting the worker's skull, resulting in a fatality, was a fraction of a second in timing, or a few inches of physical space.
That is terrifying when you put it like that.
The physics of the failure, the lack of tool lanyards, the failure to barricade the drop zone below, the lack of behavioral auditing, they are exactly the same whether a man dies or a pallet breaks.
So you are investigating the failure of the control mechanism entirely independent of the lucky outcome. Because luck is not a strategy, and luck always runs out.
That is the essence of it. If you ignore the near miss because we got lucky, you leave the entire failed system in place. You are guaranteeing that the event will happen again, and next time the worker might step 2 feet to the left.
Wow.
That is why the CCPS guidelines emphasize that risk is the significant driver for incident investigation. For near misses, the potential consequences, coupled with how often scaffolding work happens at your facility, determine the depth and rigor of the investigation you must launch.
Okay, let's step off the theoretical chalkboard and onto the actual facility floor.
Let's do it.
Let's say our luck just ran out. An incident has occurred. A forklift just slammed into a chemical rack, a high-pressure pipe ruptured, a worker is down on the floor, and alarms are blaring.
A nightmare scenario.
Yeah. Now that we understand why we must investigate, let's walk through the exact chronological steps of what a safety professional must do in those critical first moments. Let's talk about the golden hours.
The immediate aftermath of an incident is pure chaos. Adrenaline is high, information is scarce, and the instinct is often to rush in and start fixing things or looking for clues.
Right. Everyone wants to play detective immediately.
But according to ISO 4501 guidelines and just fundamental incident command protocols, step 1 is absolute and non-negotiable. Immediate action must be taken to prevent further injury and to mitigate the ongoing hazard. Life safety is always paramount.
You have to secure the people first.
Always. You have to shut down the process, isolate the energy sources, contain the spill if possible without risking personnel, and evacuate or treat the injured.
Right. You do not start snapping documentary photos while a worker is actively bleeding.
No.
Or while an uncombusted toxic gas is still filling an enclosed room, you secure the safety of the people first, full stop.
No, stop.
But once that immediate acute threat is neutralized, the focus has to shift instantaneously to securing the scene. And the sources note that the investigation team needs to be physically based near the scene to efficiently collect that fleeting physical evidence.
Performing an investigation from a corporate office 3 states away by reviewing emailed reports is rarely, if ever, effective.
You can't just zoom into a chemical spill.
No, you have to be on the ground. And this brings us to a concept that is absolutely critical for the ASP exam and legal compliance. Chain of custody.
Chain of custody, okay.
The incident site must be temporarily secured, usually by local supervisors, security, or first responders using barricade tape. But then it must be strictly held under the official investigation team's control until they explicitly release it back to operations.
I think of this exactly like a classic crime scene.
It's very similar.
You wouldn't let a well-meaning janitor walk into a bank vault with a broom to sweep up the debris before the detectives arrive to dust for prints or photograph the safe.
Never.
The exact same logic applies on a manufacturing floor. If a worker slips and falls on a mezzanine, and a supervisor immediately sends someone up there with a mop to clean the slippery floor before it's documented, the investigation is completely compromised.
The evidence of why it was slippery is gone forever.
Right.
Was it a slow oil drip from an overhead crane? Was it water from a leaking roof? Was it a chemical solvent that degraded the slip-resistant coating? You'll never know now.
Because it's in a mop bucket.
Exactly. The protocols for preserving that evidence are incredibly strict for a reason. Physical evidence failed valves, ruptured hoses, shattered PKE has to be securely tagged and stored for as long as needed. We are talking about adhering to forensic quality procedures and evidentiary preservation regulations.
Let's get into the weeds on that, because the exam prep materials highlight some very specific, nuanced scenarios about preserving data, particularly digital photography at the scene. It's not just pulling out a smartphone and taking a few quick snaps for Instagram.
Not at all. If you are documenting an incident scene, the rigor applied to photography must withstand legal scrutiny. Investigators are trained to take digital pictures, but then print them immediately or secure them on a locked, unalterable drive.
So no photoshopping the lighting to make it look better.
Absolutely not. And they must make detailed contemporaneous notes describing the context of every single image. What were the lighting conditions?
Why does that matter so much?
Well, a chemical stain might look dark brown under an artificial camera flash, but it might have been nearly invisible to the operator under the dim sodium vapor lights that were actually on at 2:00 a.m. when the incident occurred.
Right. If you take the photo at noon with the bay doors open, you are completely misrepresenting the operator's visual environment.
Exactly. You have to document the exact date, the time, and even the orientation of the photographer.
The orientation?
Yes. Was the photographer standing facing north? Was the photo taken from the operator's eye level or from an elevated catwalk looking down? All of this preserves the validity of the data, so it holds up not just in an internal management review, but potentially in a court of law.
Or a workers' compensation dispute.
Or a hostile regulatory hearing with OSHA investigators. Every piece of data must be defensible.
All right, so the scene is locked down, the physical evidence is preserved, bagged, and tagged. We have our photos with the lighting and orientation meticulously noted.
We're in a good spot.
But a shattered valve or a puddle of oil can't tell you what happened 10 minutes before it broke. Now you have to deal with the absolute messiest variable in any investigation: human memory.
Oh, yes.
How do we ensure the information collected from witnesses is actually objective and useful?
It requires a highly disciplined approach to fact-finding. The goal of a fact-finding investigation is to cast a wide net, gathering as much information as humanly possible from witnesses, physical evidence, and paper or electronic records.
Like maintenance logs and training records.
Exactly. SCADA system printouts, all of it. You want to determine what actually happened. But here is the critical caveat that sets the tone for the entire process. It is explicitly an inquiry to determine cause, not to assign blame.
That is so important. The moment operators think you are building a case to fire someone, the information flow instantly starts.
It dries up immediately.
The walls go up, the union reps step in, and you will get nothing but, I don't know, and I can't recall.
Exactly. So the composition of the team doing this fact-finding is incredibly important. The complexity of the incident dictates the makeup of the team.
Okay, so how do you build that team?
For smaller, low-risk incidents, a local supervisor is usually instrumental, guided by a safety professional to ensure the process remains objective. But for incidents with greater actual or potential consequences, the CCPS guidelines clearly state that a multidisciplinary team is required.
Multidisciplinary. Okay.
This typically consists of a designated leader and 1 to 5 additional members with highly varied backgrounds.
You don't just want 5 safety managers in a conference room pontificating about OSHA regulations. That won't solve the problem.
You need frontline operators on that team. They are the only ones who actually understand the unwritten day-to-day quirks of the machinery.
The people who actually turn the valves.
Yes. You need maintenance personnel who know the repair history and the workarounds that have become normalized over time. You might need outside contractors, forensic metallurgy experts, and process engineers.
Why so many different roles?
They bring diverse lenses to the data. This prevents the investigation from suffering from collective blind spots. An engineer sees a stress fracture, an operator sees a lever that's too hard to pull. You need both perspectives.
I want to focus on the interviewing process because interviewing someone after a traumatic event is incredibly difficult.
It's a skill, a real skill.
You have cognitive load, you have the stress of the event, and human memory is notoriously fallible. 2 people can watch the exact same pipe rupture and give you completely different accounts of what color the smoke was or who pushed the emergency stop button.
Happens all the time.
How do investigators handle conflicting witness statements or protect against their own biased data collection?
It is arguably the most difficult skill an investigator must master. First, they use structured interviewing techniques, often rooted in cognitive interviewing practices.
What does that mean in practice?
This means asking open-ended questions and avoiding leading the witness. You never ask, "Do you see the pressure gauge spike past 100 psi before it blew?"
Because that implants a memory.
Exactly. You just handed them the answer. Instead, you ask, "Can you describe what the control panel looked like just before the sound started?"
You let them paint the picture rather than handing them a coloring book and telling them to stay in the lines.
I love that analogy, yes.
But what happens when the picture they paint completely contradicts the physical evidence or contradicts another witness?
The guidelines provide rigorous requirement for exactly that reason. The data collection guidance demands that teams meticulously document the source of each statement and each conclusion.
So no sweeping generalizations.
Right. You do not write in your report, "The machine was making a weird noise." That is an unverified conclusion. You write, "Operator John Doe stated during a June 4th interview that he heard the machine making a high-pitched grinding noise at approximately 14 point hours."
Ah, I see.
This allows a third-party reviewer to assess the validity of every single piece of data and track it back to its absolute origin.
If you are making a claim, you have to show your evidence. It's like high school math. You can't just write the answer. You have to show the formula you used to get there.
Exactly.
And you can't just cherry pick the evidence that supports your favorite hypothesis, right? If an investigator assumes a failure was caused by operator fatigue, they might consciously or unconsciously ignore data that points to a mechanical failure.
And that is confirmation bias, which is the death of a valid investigation. To combat this, the investigation team is required to approach the data with a completely open mind. Crucially, they must assess both supporting data and refuting data.
Refuting data, so evidence that proves their theory wrong.
Yes. In fact, robust investigation reports are often required to specifically document credible causes that were considered but ultimately not investigated further. Yes, and to explicitly document data that does not support the team's final conclusions. If 3 witnesses say the alarm sounded and 1 witness insists it didn't, you don't just leave the dissenting witness out of the report to make it look cleaner.
You don't just delete them from the narrative.
No. You document the conflict and explain why the team weighted the evidence the way they did. You have to show your work.
Okay, let's step back and look at the big picture here. We have locked down the scene, we have taken forensic photography, we have pulled maintenance logs, we've conducted structured cognitive interviews with a multidisciplinary team.
We've been busy.
Very busy. We have this massive mountain of raw data. But practically speaking, in the real world of manufacturing, construction, or chemical processing, a company cannot afford to launch a month-long, multi-million-dollar 5-person inquiry every time a worker gets a paper cut.
Obviously not.
Or, a half-gallon of non-toxic coolant spills on the floor. How does a safety professional scale this effort without compromising the whole system?
Resource management is a critical component of a sustainable safety program. You have to scale the effort proportionally to the risk. The CCPS text outlines a tiered approach used by organizations to manage their resources effectively.
Okay, what are the tiers?
There are 3 distinct levels based on combinations of consequences and frequencies. The first, highest tier, is a formal, exhaustive investigation, which we commonly call a root cause analysis, or RCA.
RCA, got it.
The second tier is a less formal, more streamlined investigation, known as an apparent cause analysis, or ACA. And the third, lowest tier, is simply logging and trending the incident data with no immediate deep dive investigation performed at all.
I like to think of this using a medical analogy again. Is an ACA like going to urgent care for a simple sprained ankle, whereas an RCA is like assembling a team of specialized surgeons and diagnosticians to figure out a complex systemic disease?
That perfectly captures the functional difference. If you sprain your ankle on a curb, you go to urgent care. The doctor does an apparent cause analysis.
Right, you trip.
Exactly, you tripped. The apparent cause is a loss of footing. The corrective action is to wrap it in ice, prescribe some anti-inflammatories, and tell you to stay off it for a few days.
They aren't ordering a bunch of expensive tests.
Right. They do not need to order a functional MRI of your brain, a full genetic workup, and a toxicology screen to figure out why your foot hit the curb at that exact angle. The apparent cause is sufficient to treat the immediate issue and get you back to baseline.
But if you keep inexplicably losing your balance, dropping things, and falling every single day, now you have a chronic, recurring issue with severe potential consequences.
Yes.
Urgent care isn't enough anymore. That triggers the need for the specialized surgeons, the root cause analysis, to find the underlying neurological or systemic failure. So in a facility, how does management know which path to take? Who acts as the triage nurse deciding if a spill gets an ACA or an RCA?
Management must explicitly dictate the criteria for each level within their written investigation program. Risk matrices are typically the significant driver here.
The risk matrix.
Yes. For serious accidents, fatalities, massive releases, catastrophic fires, the actual consequences automatically mandate an RCA.
Right, there's no debate there.
None. But for less serious incidents, the decision is driven by evaluating the actual severity and the potential severity, combined with the likelihood of recurrence. The ultimate goal is to use the right tool for the right level of risk, ensuring consistent depth of analysis across the entire organization.
Because if you mandate a full RCA for every minor first aid case, the entire safety system will literally grind to a halt. You will induce severe fatigue in your investigative teams.
We call that initiative overload.
Initiative overload. Tell me more about that.
It's a concept explicitly warned about in our sources, particularly in the context of the Baker Panel review, which analyzed the catastrophic BP Texas City refinery explosion.
Oh, that was a huge event.
It was devastating. And the panel noted that if you throw massive, complex safety protocols and exhaustive investigation requirements at every minor low-risk issue, facility personnel and contractors simply get swamped.
They drown in the paperwork.
Yes. They spend all their time filling out convoluted forms and attending investigation meetings instead of actually doing their jobs safely on the floor. You dilute your resources.
That makes total sense. You lose focus on the big risks.
Exactly. Management has to set clear, specific criteria that trigger each tier so that when a high-risk event does occur, the multidisciplinary team have the energy, the time, and the mandate to dig as deep as necessary.
Let's follow that mandate. Let's look closely at that top tier, the RCA level. The risk matrix has flashed red. The potential consequences of the incident were severe. Management has assembled the multidisciplinary team and told them to dig deep.
Time to get to work.
What specific analytical tools do safety professionals use to cut through the noise, bypass the immediate excuses, and find the actual systemic truth?
When we talk about root cause analysis, we are talking about a disciplined practice that explores all possible factors by repeatedly and relentlessly asking what happened, how it happened, and most importantly, why it happened.
Why? Like a toddler.
Honestly, yes. The 5 whys is a real technique. The focus is entirely on prevention, not punishment. You are trying to get past the immediate cause, the thing that physically broke or the person who made the error, to find the most basic underlying organizational cause.
Let's map this out with a scenario. Give me a practical example of the difference between an immediate cause and a root cause, because this is guaranteed to be a conceptual question on the ASP exam.
Let's expand on your slippery floor analogy from earlier.
Okay, the spilled oil.
Right. An operator is walking across a mezzanine, slips in a puddle of hydraulic fluid, falls, and severely fractures his arm. The immediate cause of the injury is a loss of traction due to the slippery floor.
That's the apparent cause.
Yes. If your investigation stops there, if you only do an apparent cause analysis, your corrective action is going to be mop the floor, put down some absorbent clay, or issue a memo telling operators to watch their step.
Which fixes the puddle, but does absolutely nothing to stop the next puddle from forming.
Exactly. So an RCA forces you to ask why the floor was slippery. Well, a hydraulic valve on the pump above the walkway was leaking.
Why was it leaking?
Because the internal seal failed prematurely.
Why did the seal fail after only 2 months of use?
Because it was a nitrile seal, which was the wrong specification for that high-temperature synthetic fluid line. It should have been Viton.
Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Why was the wrong specification used during the rebuild?
Because the purchasing department switched to a cheaper supplier without initiating a management of change review or consulting process engineering.
Wow, so you track it all the way back to an office building.
Yes.
The root cause isn't a puddle of oil on a catwalk. The root cause is a flawed procurement policy and a failure in the management of change process.
Precisely. And fixing that procurement policy prevents not just that one puddle, but potentially hundreds of other catastrophic component failures across the entire plant.
That is incredible leverage.
It is. This analysis identifies what ISO 45001 formally calls contributory failures. These include latent organizational factors related to communication breakdowns, competence gaps, worker fatigue, equipment design flaws, or procedural inadequacies.
How do they keep all this straight? It sounds like a massive web of information.
To map all this out logically, teams use specific techniques like causal factor analysis, which graphically examines the chronological chain of events and the latent conditions that align to allow the incident to occur.
And one of the most famous, highly effective tools for this, which is another absolute must-know for the ASP exam, is the fishbone diagram.
Also known as the Ishikawa diagram.
Yes, the Ishikawa diagram. I love this tool because it's highly visual. It literally looks like the skeleton of a fish. You draw a horizontal line across a whiteboard, which is the spine. At the head of the fish on the right side, you write the specific incident, say the premature hydraulic seal failure, and then you draw diagonal bones coming off the spine, representing different categories of potential causes. Traditionally, these are the 5 M's and an E: machinery, methods, materials, manpower, measurements, and environment.
That's a great breakdown.
You brainstorm every single possible cause and map it onto these bones to visually organize the chaos of your data.
It is an incredibly powerful tool for a multidisciplinary team because it forces individuals out of their professional silos.
How so?
Well, if you just ask a maintenance mechanic why the pump failed, he is naturally going to focus entirely on the machinery bone.
Right, he's looking for a stripped gear.
Exactly. But the fishbone visually demands that he also consider the methods. Were the maintenance procedures adequate? It forces the process engineer to look at materials. Was the seal the right composition?
Oh, right.
It forces human resources to look at manpower. Was the mechanic who rebuilt the pump adequately trained? Or was he working his 14th consecutive 12-hour shift?
Here is where the field of safety gets truly fascinating to me. Safety professionals using these tools aren't just looking for mechanical failures like stripped gears, blown gaskets, or frayed wires. They are acting as organizational psychologists.
That's a very accurate way to put it.
They are deeply analyzing human performance and organizational culture. Why was the operator fatigued? Was it a failure in the fatigue management software? Why was communication poor between shifts?
Yeah.
Is there a toxic culture of fear on the floor that stops frontline workers from speaking up when they see a contractor using the wrong part?
You are hitting on the most advanced aspect of incident investigation. If we connect this specific process to the broader framework of a safety management system, this is exactly why the CCPS states that the outputs of the incident investigation element must be used to facilitate the performance improvement of other safety elements.
Everything is connected.
Everything. In almost all cases, the recommendations aimed at fixing the root causes of an incident will involve modifications to other risk-based process safety elements.
Give me an example.
For example, your RCA recommendations might require you to overhaul your contractor management element, your training element, or your management of change element. By identifying and addressing the root causes of personnel errors or equipment failures, you develop highly leveraged solutions.
Leverage is key.
These solutions reduce the frequency and consequences of entire categories of incidents across the enterprise, not just the specific one that triggered the investigation.
You aren't just fixing the broken machine, you are fixing the broken organizational system that created the conditions for the machine to break.
Perfectly said.
Which brings us to the aftermath. The investigation is officially closed. The fishbone diagram is drawn, the root cause is identified, the procurement policy is updated, and the new seals are installed.
We can all go home, right?
Not quite. The safety professional's job isn't finished. How does the organization ensure this hard-won, incredibly expensive knowledge isn't just shoved into a digital filing cabinet and forgotten forever? We are talking about the long game of safety management.
The long game relies on 3 pillars: rigorous documentation, proactive trending, and a transparent culture of sharing.
Let's start with documentation.
First, document retention. This is critical not just for internal organizational learning, but for strict legal and regulatory compliance. Organizations must maintain a centralized, highly secure archive.
What goes in it?
Everything. They have to keep the initial incident reports, the transcribed witness statements, the forensic photos, the metallurgical lab reports, the final RCA reports, and all the documentation proving that the corrective actions were actually implemented and verified.
So you can't just say you fixed it, you have to prove you fixed it.
Exactly. And they have to maintain these records for specific durations based on established corporate retention schedules and OSHA statutes.
You cannot just let individual safety analysts or plant managers keep their own siloed files on a personal laptop or a thumb drive. It has to be accessible institutional knowledge.
Absolutely. Because individual analysts retire, plant managers move to different companies, but the industrial hazards remain. If the institutional memory walks out the door, you will repeat the incident 5 years later.
That's a scary thought.
It happens all the time. Once you have this robust central database, you must actively utilize it through trending. The guidelines emphasize that you have to log all reported incidents, including those low-risk near misses and apparent cause analyses, into a searchable database.
But data entry is entirely useless if no one is tasked with analyzing it.
Right. The CCPS text explicitly warns about this, stating, if management has no plans to analyze the data for trends, entering it into the database is probably not beneficial.
It just becomes a bureaucratic black hole.
Exactly. Therefore, periodic analysis of this database must be formally assigned to a specific individual.
Like who?
Typically an incident program coordinator or a senior safety analyst. Their job is to constantly scan the data to identify adverse trends, recurring underlying causes, and chronic issues that might be flying under the radar.
How do they spot that?
They can sort incidents by department, by time of day, or look for latent commonalities. If they see a trend, for example, a sudden, slow-burning spike in hand lacerations in a specific packaging department over a 6-month period, that trend itself can trigger a formal RCA.
Even if none of the cuts were that bad?
Yes. To figure out why the chronic issue was occurring, even if no single injury was severe, the frequency becomes the risk.
But let me challenge that premise with a real-world scenario. Let's say a new safety analyst looks at the database and sees a sudden, incredibly sharp increase in reported incidents. Let's say reported near misses in the chemical unloading bay double in a single month.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Management's first instinct is going to be sheer panic, right? The plant manager is going to assume the facility's falling apart, the operators are getting sloppy, and the bay is becoming incredibly unsafe. Is that always true? Does a spike in data equal a spike in danger?
This raises an important question, and the answer is absolutely not. Data trends in safety must be carefully and intelligently interpreted to understand their true underlying causes.
So more reports doesn't mean more accidents.
The CCPS guidelines actually use this exact scenario as a cautionary tale. A sharp increase in reported incidents, particularly near misses, might not mean the facility's operational performance has degraded at all. In many cases, it represents a highly positive, massive improvement in the company's reporting culture.
Meaning the workers finally feel safe enough from retaliation to actually speak up about the hazards they were previously hiding.
Yes. It means personnel have become more proactive, more vigilant, and more conservative in their reporting. They are finally logging the dropped wrenches and the minor spills that they used to just sweep under the rug or fix quietly to avoid being yelled at.
That's a huge win.
It's massive. Alternatively, a new supervisor might simply have a stricter interpretation of the reporting requirements. You might actually need to conduct a mini investigation just to understand the contextual relationship of the data trend itself.
Investigating the investigation data.
Exactly. But the absolute worst thing management can do is react blindly to the raw numbers and punish a department for a spike in near-miss reporting.
Because What happens then?
If you do that, you will instantly drive the reporting underground again, you will lose your visibility, and the next incident will be a catastrophic one.
That is such a vital, counterintuitive nuance for anyone taking the exam or leading a team in the field. More data doesn't necessarily mean more danger. It might just mean more visibility. And once you have this visibility and you have learned these lessons, you have a moral and professional obligation to share the findings.
Sharing is the final outward-facing step of the process. Vital safety information must be distributed beyond the walls of the specific facility where the incident occurred.
How do companies usually handle that?
This can be done internally via interactive training sessions with other facilities owned by the company. It can be done externally through industry news releases, presentations at professional safety conferences, or by inputting the sanitized data into industry-wide databases.
Without giving away trade secrets, obviously.
Right, while always working with legal to respect business confidentiality, of course. The ultimate goal of the safety profession is that a hard-learned lesson in a refinery in Texas can be shared to prevent a fatality in an identical process unit in Germany.
That is the highest calling of the profession. So let's synthesize our entire journey through QHSE talks today. For those of you specifically targeting the ASP exam, Domain 2, Topic 9 demands that you deeply understand the terminology.
We investigate incidents, not accidents.
Yes. You need to know the strict hierarchy of the initial response. Life safety first, mitigate the hazard, secure the scene, and establish an unbroken chain of custody.
You need to understand the structural differences between an apparent cause analysis and a root cause analysis, and how risk matrices dictate which one to use.
And you must be fluent in the analytical tools, the fishbone or Ishikawa diagram, causal factor analysis, and structured cognitive interviewing.
And for your practice in the real world, beyond the exam room, you need to internalize the philosophy that an incident investigation is never just a narrow inquiry into a single broken valve or a single mistaken employee.
Right, it's so much bigger.
It is a comprehensive stress test of the health, the culture, and the integrity of your entire organizational management system.
Before we wrap up, there is one final, somewhat uncomfortable truth derived from human nature that I want to leave you with. On any industrial job site, facility personnel have a massive vested interest in completing investigations as quickly as possible.
They absolutely do.
Production managers want the yellow barricade taped down. They want to get the assembly line running again. Operators want to get back to their regular jobs and stop answering questions.
The gravitational pull toward a quick fix is immense. And if that natural operational pressure is not actively and courageously countered by safety leadership, demanding to dig deeply into the underlying organizational causes, you will only ever get cursory, useless analyses that blame the worker and fix nothing.
Which brings us to the ultimate question for your career. How will you, as a safety professional, cultivate a culture that values the painful, messy, expensive truth over a quick return to production? Because if you rush to point at the x-ray and say, there's the broken bone, without ever asking why the bones in your organization are getting brittle in the first place, you are just going to be dealing with compound fractures for the rest of your career. Stay curious, stay rigorous, and we'll see you on the next session of QHSE Talks.